Let's welcome Cody and Kelly into the chat as well. It's 4:05 here, so we're all in the same time zone. So it's 4:05 for everybody. Um, let's just officially kick things off. And of course, it'll take some time to build this conversation that involves everyone to weigh in on their own experiences, own like questions that they might have. So please feel free to engage like at any level. If you want to just sit back, video off, take it all in, observe, that's totally fine with us. If you wanted to really, ask specific questions for every slide, every point that I bring up, please, I invite you to add in those questions as well, because I am learning as I go as well. This is not something that I have mastered. I'm nowhere near close to that. So I'm constantly learning. And the more input that I have from the individuals that are closest to my circle, the better experience is going to be for me and everyone that's in the circle. And it is definitely a collective effort to start this kind of conversation, to continue it on, and then for that to convert into an actual movement, and that's going to spark change. So I sincerely hope that you're all excited, and this is something that, I feel some of you have been kind of like wondering about on your own, but maybe you just did not feel that there were enough resources, or you didn't know where to begin. And that is a very common struggle that I think we're all experiencing, not just around this like topic of hip hop and the roots of it, but about the whole anti-Black racism and our own prejudice and all these inherent things that we have been experiencing. So all of this will be bigger and more than just hip hop. It never is just about the quote unquote hip hop, but that is also a vehicle. It's also a tool that really bring people together. And, for me, I literally owe like so much of my part of my life to my interactions with hip hop. So I want to just do my part in sharing what I know. And I'm here as a student. I am not here to lecture anyone. I am like nowhere higher or lower. It's just we're all the same, and we're going through this chapter all together. So this is day one of this specific conversation. And I do hope that everyone can just take that small step forward, so that we can feel and also see that big change take place within our own selves and within our own community. Hey, Liz. So let's just, welcome everyone into the chat. Little culture 101 with 509 School of Hip Hop. I do have a few slides that I had prepared. I don't want this to be like very lecture type. I would like it to be more of a conversation, discussion, but there are a lot of things that I always go back to whenever I'm teaching a breaking workshop or a hip hop workshop or just around the culture. I do rely heavily on some of these materials, and for some it's maybe a little bit familiar, for some it's like brand new information. So I tried my best to make it relevant to what is happening today, but also very broad in terms of like how hip hop kind of came to be, right? We're not going to get so fixated on like hip hop today. We're not going to get so fixated on just a dance community. It's going to be just how hip hop really came to be and how it still continues to be a driving force for a lot of these movements around social justice, and mobilizing communities, and honestly like inspiring and empowering the next generation. Because that mindset and mentality of each one teach one and giving back to the community is not at the forefront, then we're kind of missing the point of what hip hop has always been in the first place, right? It's not about the possessions. It's about like just bringing people up and then making sure that they feel included. They feel unique. They feel like they have a voice. And that's what I have kind of, used hip hop as. I always struggle with communicating verbally as an immigrant, as a newcomer to Canada. So when I found out that, I can just dance and really use that to communicate my feelings and express, that just gave me an entire different perspective of like who I am And that identity is what really stuck with me. So that's also another reason we focus a lot on building self-confidence for the kids, because once they are confident about the history, the culture, and themselves, they gain a whole lot better sense of their own identity and characters, and then they can really do things with that, right? So that's all it is, really. So we're gonna learn more about ourselves, and of course the culture of hip hop and the history as well. So I hope everyone is excited. Thank you for joining. So as we go through the slides, if you have questions, I don't know how the screens are going to look. So, you can raise hands, you can type in something on the chat, and I'll do my best to address them right away. And there will be some times where I just kind of leave it up to us to really just go through the conversation. Do we have any questions or anything they want to kind of bring up before we get started? How many of us do we have? 8 of us. No? Cool. All right. Let me just start with sharing this screen right here. Can everybody see this screen okay? Awesome. Cool. I'm not actually on Canva or like PowerPoint or Google Slides. It's just kind of a PDF file. I'm just skipping through page after page. So just be easy on the whole technical side of things, okay? It's the content that matters, all right? So just to kick things off, of course, this is more around the cultural side of what we call hip hop. We may associate with the term hip hop with the style of clothing, with a certain, language, like slangs that we may use, different ways of greeting. If I say peace, if I say yo, like what up, these are all part of like hip hop language, like if I go up to someone, hello sir, how are you today? No one's gonna be like, oh, that's so hip hop of you. But if I say, yo, what's up? Like, what up, doe? Like in Detroit, for example, that's how people from Motor City, Detroit greet one another. What up, doe? So that's all rooted into the culture of hip hop lifestyle and how people communicate it, towards one another. So there's a lot of cultural elements that we're going to get into today. And, at the bottom, we always outline, it's largely around the arts, visual art, like graffiti, tagging, murals. Graffiti as a visual art form. Music can be turntablism, DJing, mixing, cutting, and production. If you are pressing buttons with a drum machine, and more on the production side, that would also fall under the category of music. And then we have poetry, rap, emceeing, spoken word. And the dancing portion, of course, is anything to do with the physical expression. It could be breaking, it could be popping, it could be hip hop, old school, whatever you choose, but it's a physical manifestation of this culture of hip hop. And all of those 4 things lead to its own culture. DJs have their own culture, so do the MCs, even within the London scene. MCs do their own thing, but of course MCs need DJs. So MCs and DJs work really well together. And same thing with, the dancers, we need music. So there's always that connection to what the DJs kind of provide in terms of the environment and the atmosphere that everyone is part of. Right, and then let's go next. This is where we break down the definition itself of what is called hip hop. I actually want to unmute everyone and just see if anybody and everybody can kind of share with them. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything to say. Like, what are some things that come to your mind when we say hip hop? Like, it could be a certain car, it could be a song, like anything that pops into your head when we say hip hop.
Yo.
Jordan?
Yeah, man. So one of the first things in sort of outside of just the elements and things like that I've been thinking a lot lately is counterculture. There's nothing really conventional conventional that comes out of hip hop that could be mapped onto culture as we know, mainstream culture as we know it. I mean, I guess as the culture gets more popular and internationally widespread, it starts to map a little bit more onto it and it's more accepted. But historically, it was literally a response out of youth that didn't really have much in terms of expressive tools. So I would always say, in some form or another, hip hop is associated with counterculture.
That's right. So it's kind of like also how the environment is what makes the response and the product and the type of movement that kind of got classified under hip hop. And yeah, to kind of add on to what Jordan was saying, and we'll have a little more about this in the next slides. But yeah, it was literally a movement that came out as a rebellious type against how the governments just dropped the funding for the arts and culture and music. And, you know, government officials would come to the South Bronx and see that the buildings are literally just like torn down. And instead of helping them to revitalize everything, they almost went the other way to just make sure that nothing good came out of that struggle. So that's where this, like, you know, political movement and the language that they use and the types of aggressive expression are that much more pure, because there was such resistance to the negative circumstances. It needed to be transformed into something way, way more positive, beyond what the politicians and beyond what the parents' councils could imagine, you know? So definitely the counterculture is always relevant to talk about. Anybody else have anything they can kind of add on to what they believe was part of hip hop, or how they defined this terminology? It's cool. We can always come back to this too. But in terms of like the definition itself, as you can see in the screen, that is actually, by the way, KRS-One on the right. He is known as one of the like more of the intellectual MCs that has always been very ahead of the time. So he came out in the, like, you know, like I would say like 80s was like the prime era before the golden age of hip hop. And he's known as like the professor, I would say, like of the hip hop MC community. And KRS stands for knowledge reigns supreme over nearly anyone. So he really prides himself in the fact that, like, you know, knowledge is something that should be really passed down through their medium. So if someone decided to pick up a microphone, it's not to start boasting. It's not to start dissing other people. It's simply to convey a message because they feel that they have the opportunity to say something and move the crowd. So that kind of like goes back to the roles and the responsibilities that each one of these elements had. You know, graffiti writer, they're the visual. So they make things look very, you know, fancy and flashy with their artistic take on things. And then the dancers are the more physical, acrobatic style of like expression. But the DJ is what kind of like sparked the whole movement, because you need the music to have people sing over it, rhyme over it, and people to dance to. So yeah, as an MC, it also means to be a master of ceremony. So you got to engage the audience. It's more than just like rhyming. But of course, the rhyming part comes with the engagement as well. If I say hip, you say hop, and then like just kind of like that back and forth engagement kind of kind of evolved into something a little bit more, I guess, complex. But the term rap actually does stand for something, and it's rhythm and poetry. So when we talk about rap music and rap culture, it's easily defined as like something you can't really understand. There's a lot of like curse words, and like, you know, it's all about the drugs and like glorifying violence and all of this stuff. But fundamentally, rap means rhythm and poetry. So it is a street poet kind of reciting their stories in a rhythmical fashion. That's the base of it, right? And then how they use that platform to do more bigger stuff, kind of like the political rap, is something how these rappers and the rap groups decided to kind of transcend what they thought was only possible with a microphone, right? So going back to the definition itself, to be hip means you are in the know, you are aware, you are kind of, yeah, it's utilizing that knowledge, not just like sitting on it, but actually being able to process it and comprehend it. Because I said it before we kind of kicked this off today. This session today, Culture 101, is not something that you're gonna just take in for like 90 minutes and decide like, boom, I got my culture credit, I'm good. I got my culture currency kind of locked down on my belt. Like, it's not something that you can just like measure and say like, I've got it. It's something we constantly have to dig deeper on, and it's a lot of self-reflection as well. You know, that's where it becomes more of a lifelong journey. So the hop really represents that movement. You know, back in the day, they used to define hip hop as a new type of party. Hip, the new music, new people, new types of environments. Hop, the party. So obviously, like when we ask kids, they think about hop. Okay, like bunnies, hopping, moving, yes, and that's literally the definition of it. It's a new type of movement. So when we come across moves like the dab or like, you know, the nene, these are part of hip hop because that is what is trendy, that is what's new in the time. But like anything else too, it does evolve, and also with everything that evolves, it has its cultural roots and the origins. So that's where we are going a little bit further into, you know, the back in the day type of thing. So hopefully, if you didn't know the definition of hip hop, you all took away something from it, because not every day we can really dissect what this terminology hip hop means. We just kind of look at it as like, oh, hip hop, one thing. R&B, boom, that's one thing. But even R&B, it's rhythm and blues, you know, so you need to understand the rhythmical, you know, side of it and the blues music and the origins of that for you to really comprehend what moving to R&B music would be like. You know, jazz, funk, you should have an understanding of the jazz and its foundation as well as funk, right? So when you talk about hip hop, if it's only been presented to you in this one packaged way, where it's like, take this class for an hour, it's called hip hop, you don't really have the opportunity to go into a certain like level of depth. But through these conversations, through your own research and homework, hopefully you can start to find that, you know, this is actually quite interesting. And it really solidifies your own values as a person, as a student of hip hop. So this is where we take a quick look at some of the iconic figures that really helped shape the culture of hip hop right from the 70s. So Afrika Bambaataa, DJ Kool Herc, and DJ Grandmaster Flash. These three are amongst the top like 5 pioneers who were right there in the 70s as hip hop became this like global movement. But what's also important to recognize is that these three have been doing this for a few years before this became more of a coined term hip hop. And these three are not the only ones that would have sparked this movement. It's just that these three really got the kind of like the glorification. But at the same time, I just watched another documentary today. It's very unfortunate that these like founding fathers of hip hop and like also women that were around at the very beginning stages of hip hop don't get the kind of recognition they deserve. You know, like hip hop is billions of dollars like that are being pumped in and out every year. But it's unfortunate to see these heads just not getting the recognition they truly deserve. But that's kind of where it's up to us to at least be educated and to just be more aware of the kind of contributions that they've made. And we internalize that information and we internalize that kind of inspiration so that we can make it into something more productive and long lasting for the next generation too. So Afrika Bambaataa, if I could say a couple of things, you know, he was known to really transform like the electro sounds of like hip hop and funk music. So when funk was around, he put like a techno twist to it, to make it much more like futuristic. So you might see pictures of him like, you know, wearing all these like fancy costumes and like, you know, like alien like kind of masks and stuff. And that was all part of like, you know, building that character as well as hip hop heads. So Africa Bambaataa, also known as the founding member of Universal Zulu Nation. Zulu Nation means it's like a collective group that really pushed the idea of peace, love, unity, and having fun. Hip hop is a vehicle that brings people together because they all love to participate in this culture, and it's important to unify people rather than divide, because there's a lot of gang influence and violence going on, you know, in that time. Like if you're thinking about how the South Bronx were in the projects in the early 70s and late 60s, I personally would not want to be standing there and like, oh man, this is some heavy shit going on. You probably don't want to be the one to be like, you guys shouldn't do that. You know, easily you would get jumped, you would get killed, and all these like bad things were around. So to put a stop to those kind of like violent acts, figures like this, Africa Bambaataa and other DJs would put on these events in the community centers, and they would really advocate for this youth empowerment and building communities. So Kool Herc is someone that especially b-boys and b-girls always pay their respect to, because he's the one that made this breakbeat possible, an extension of breakbeat possible for the dancers to dance to the breaks. And that's what we call it, breaking, break dancing. Break boy for b-boys, break girl for b-girls. The term breakdancing literally has nothing to do with like breaking body parts, breaking glass, chairs, and nothing like that. It never had anything to do with that. But of course, the popular media and your parents always like to say like, oh, is that why you call it breakdancing? But really, it's because the dancers dance to a certain part of a song, which is known as a break. Songs usually have the intro, the hook, or the chorus, the verse, and then the break. And the break means that the vocals are dropped. It's just a drummer maybe having a solo. Maybe there's a horn behind it, but it's really about one or two instrumentation at most. So those times are the exciting points of the record. And that's when the dancers would be like, oh, I like this part. It's much more upbeat. It gets me going. And that's when they decided to rush the floor. And DJ Kool Herc found a way to extend that so that it's not just about 20 seconds of hype, but he found a way to loop it. And we're going to go into that in the next slide. And then Grandmaster Flash on the right side over here, he's someone that really pushed the technological advancement on the DJing and turntablism. If you think about the 1960s and 1970s, there were nothing close to laptops, smartphones, Spotify, YouTube. It was all analog. It was all physical copies of records, turntables. And what he did was he was one of the first to start placing his hand on the record to rewind it back to find that spot where the dancers were dancing to. And you know, in the early years, and like kind of like how my dad always told me not to touch the record, it's not something we're supposed to do. But again, as a DJ, that's part of your instrument. That is your instrument, and you want to build that comfortability, and you want to manipulate it to a point where you can create these unique sounds. So that's where, you know, he pushed that boundary to make use of that turntable and a piece of record. So this is where we get to take a look at the flyer that was actually used to promote Back to School Jam in the 1973. This is considered to be the birth date, official birth date of hip hop, August 11, 1973. And it took place at a community center, like the rec room of this building at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. And this was actually organized by Kool Herc's sister. You know, so she was there to kind of like spearhead this movement, and her brother Kool Herc just happened to be the DJ that played good music, and they knew how to bring the people together. So you can see 25 cents for ladies, 50 cents for the fellas. It would have attracted a lot of people. But as I've heard and learned as well, it's not like this party had hosted like 500 people. He said that it was maybe like 50 to 100 people at most. I don't know. I think there are speculations that there was about like 100, 200 people, but like nevertheless, it wasn't something that was experienced by like the entire borough of New York. It was just at that block, on that block, at this unit. They were able to come together, and the following was there because, like I said before, Kool Herc has been doing this for a while. So he had his people that would enjoy listening to his music. And this quote that you see at the bottom, when I extended the break, that was the best part of the record that people were dancing to. So that meant that he found two copies of the same record. So there is this very famous record called Apache by Incredible Bongo Ben. And he would wait until the breakbeat of that record plays. And when that starts coming on, it's actually something that everyone will have heard. The jump on it. Din, 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 din. Huh. So that's the same break that was used in that song. So he had the same record on two turntables. And he would cue up the second turntable to the very beginning of that break. And as soon as the first record hit the breakbeat and it came to the end, he would cue up the second record, second turntable, scratch it, and he would move the fader over to the turntable number 2 to extend that breakbeat. And that extension of the break became that revolutionizing point where like the DJ made it possible for the dancers to stay on the floor to continue partying. Because hip hop came from soul, funk, jazz, disco era. So disco was huge, and what I had learned as well is that during the time of disco music, especially the African Americans that were attending these parties didn't feel like they were connecting to what disco music and what disco parties were promoting, because it was all about celebrities, you know, dressing up all fly in their fur coats and things like that. And disco music had people dancing the entire time, songs beginning to the end. And it became very, I guess, like too fancy, too fabricated. So people that wanted to create something new just made this hip hop music possible by taking ingredients from soul, funk, jazz, and disco. They would find the drum breaks from this record, and they would find like the saxophone sample from that record, and he would find the vocal parts of the soul music from the 60s and 50s, and they would just find a way to kind of merge all those things and layer them into producing something that were later known as hip hop. So this shows a quick, very brief timeline of how hip hop came to be. And like everything, it has its origins, it has its roots, right? Alicia, thanks for joining. I don't know if anyone else is in the waiting room. I don't think so. So this is where we're taking a quick look at how, as Mel mentioned, how everything came together. We cannot forget about all the roots, because that's what makes up the DNA, you know, of the movements that came after. Rhythm and blues, you can trace it back to the jazz music. And soul music came from the R&B. Funk came from soul, and disco came from funk. And hip hop kind of combined all of that. And every single category that I've outlined here has huge direct roots to the African culture and their cultural practices that they had carried on from all over, you know, Africa, and how they had, you know, come over to America to express how they truly felt through their artistic expressions. And they simply became these movements of jazz. And then, of course, that kind of sparked the movement for the jazz dancing. And same thing with soul and funk and disco dancing, you know, Soul Train. All these things is directly a response to what you would feel in terms of the music. So, you know, if you have not checked out Hip Hop Evolution as well, I highly encourage you checking out at least the first episode of the first season, The Foundation, because that kind of determines whether you're in it or you're not. But even if you don't follow through with the rest of the seasons, it's enough information for you to process and internalize, and you decide from there, like, okay, you know what, I've learned enough for me to apply, because you don't want this to be very overwhelming either. As I said in the beginning, you don't want this to be like, oh my God, that was 3 hours of culture, I can't handle any more of that. No, like, you have resources to tap into this any day of the week, right? And it's only when you start practicing it, when you start to put it into something else, you start to feel like it's connecting, because like knowledge is nothing without the application, right? So same thing with all of these things, you know, go back in time to like dig into like, you know, James Brown and like Nina Simone, and like all these iconic figures were saying something. They were saying something very, very powerful and meaningful, and it's very much relevant to how we are seeing the world come together today. Fall apart, but also more importantly, we are coming together. So you can really start to see how much of a like parallel, you know, it kind of like points out in terms of the evolution over the years, right? So the next slide, we have a way to break down the artistic elements of hip hop. So now, as I mentioned before, hip hop has its 4 core elements: graffiti art, visual component; DJing, the musical component; breaking, the physical art; and MCing, the poetic side of it. Now, these are the 4 fundamental ones, but you know, other people have included beatboxing, street entrepreneurship, fashion, language, a lot of these different things, you know, and it never ends because everything evolves. And as I mentioned earlier, graffiti has its own culture. And like, if you think about graffiti art, this is where I am getting a lot of the information too from. Graffiti School is a textbook literally for students and teachers. And it has a lot of the technical like practices you could do when it comes to different styles of graffiti, but it also has a lot of good knowledge on how the history of calligraphy and like hieroglyphics came around from very, very ancient times. So graffiti is not only like 50 years old, you know, it dates back thousands of years, right? So the term graffiti itself actually is linked to scratching the surface of the walls to like draw things and communicate. So that's where we're kind of like, you know, drawing those inspirations from. And graffiti writers are always making a statement by putting their names on a train, on a sticker, on the wall. It means that I was here. It's that statement you're making. And the amount of confidence you would have to be able to go out to a place and just leave your mark there. That's really the essence of this hip hop too, and the rebellious movement as well. All right, but here I'm not suggesting everyone go tag because you know you feel confident about your name. Learn what to do and what not to do. And then the DJing, disc jockey, and I'm not talking just about playing music, pressing play and pausing, rewinding. It's about understanding the history of how this music came together. And there's an art form of turntablism, where you can manipulate the record to spin it forward, spin it back, scratch, cut, fade. It's a very technical art form. And as I've been practicing it myself, I've built a whole new level of appreciation and understanding of DJing. And then we have, of course, breaking. But, you know, I say breaking and b-boying because it was the original form of hip hop dancing. There was simply no like, you know, urban choreography. There was no like, classes even, right? It was just a physical representation of the music, the sounds, the break beats. So when people dance to the breaks, we call it breaking. And then of course it evolved to party social dancing, and then, you know, the West Coast influence of like popping and then locking, wave, animation, and all these things kind of grew in its own ways too. And then the MC, as I mentioned earlier, they're the storytellers. They're the ones that move the crowd, that get the audience excited, that give the shout out to the DJs. And just to kind of give everyone a little bit of a context too, in terms of the roles that DJ and an MC played, DJ came first, and DJs would actually, between their sets, just grab the microphone and say, yo, my name is DJ JFX. Thank you all for coming. We're gonna be here till 2 a.m. Tip your bartenders. That was the DJ's role. He didn't call himself an MC. He just mastered the ceremony, the party. And then that became an opportunity for other people to be on the microphone, to really just take that responsibility a little bit further and say, yo, like, my name is this, I'm here with my man DJ over here, I want to give a shout out to that guy, that girl, blah, blah, blah. And that became an art form of its own. And how the role of DJ always supersedes MCs and other elements is that from the early days, it was always Jam Master Jay and Run DMC, DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Eric B and Rakim. Meaning the DJ was here before on stage, and then the MCs came on to elevate that experience for everyone. Because it's much more natural and it's much more exciting when they hear just music for people to dance to, and then someone comes on with the microphone and like, yo, you guys having a good time? As opposed to someone just coming in with a microphone, no music, be like, hey everybody, how you guys doing? With no background music, you know. So that's where the role of a DJ still remains to be very, very crucial. And we always have to pay that respect and pay our dues to the DJs that have paved the ways, because without them, we don't have ways to express physically. We don't have ways to enjoy the music side of it either, you know? So I just wanted to help everyone make that connection between the DJ component and the MC. And the rap also, if you're just joining in, RAP stands for rhythm and poetry. So just know that there has to be that rhythmical fashion and then the poetic side of it too. It can't just be about nothing, right? So next up, we got the pillars of hip hop. Oh, yes, Liz, do you have a question? Let me just unmute you there. Yes.
So is like a DJ, MC, a person that like transitions from one activity to another? Like, is it a person that links to other, like, you know?
Yes, to a certain degree, because like MC's role is to kind of fill the gap, you know?
Okay.
Because like if you go, let's say you go to a rap concert, you're gonna want to hear the rappers just perform. But even listening to one record, listening to records, you don't hear an MC talk from the first second of the record until the end. You know, it has its introduction, it has just the instrumentation, and then it has a chorus. And the chorus sometimes is just like very quick melodies. It's not even the main rapper that's got to be singing. And then pauses are very important too.
Okay.
When you think about any MCs, like someone like we just had him on the slide, past President Obama, he's a great speaker. He's a great MC because he knows how to take the time, the body language and all these things. That all these traits make up a great MC, you know, and you have to have confidence. You have to possess a certain level of like, you know, likable personalities. And then you need to use your voice and you need to amplify it. You can't just be like, hey guys, I believe in something. You know, you have to project that to a point where people feel compelled to actually move after hearing that, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the MC comes into play, to kind of pick up the energy from the audience. If they feel that, you know what, no one's really dancing, at that point an MC might be like, yo, what's going on? Like, let's everybody make some noise and all these things to kind of spark that excitement once again. And then sometimes people might just be in awe of what's going on. So they need to just kind of communicate like, are you guys enjoying this right now? Can you give it up for the DJ? And that's just how you can kind of like keep the party going. And that's
So
really
like it's like a mood maker kind of.
Yes.
Like just kind of yeah, just like checks out the mood and then kind of gets the party going. And
yes.
Okay.
So I like to use that acronym MC, like moving the crowd. You know, you can physically move them. Is that okay? Party's over, everybody go to your car. Or like, you know, owner of a blue Volkswagen Jetta, can you move your car, please? Move the crowd, move the car. But yeah, it's that person that plays a role of kind of dictating where the party's going next, right? So when we're talking about these pillars of hip hop, it's just more the philosophy, and this is something that like someone like Africa Bambaataa really tried to push onto the community. It's not about the money. It's not about the rep. I mean, a lot of the respect thing and like, you know, I think kind of like the status thing did matter in the earlier years because like it was not present before. So people kind of felt the need to say, no, we started this. We're known for this, not them. So it was very competitive in that sense, but because that also sparked a lot of the violence and division within the communities, hip hop communities, Africa Bambaataa and the Universal Zulu Nations formed this group to bring people together and actually facilitate these meetings within the communities to look for ways to do things in a more peaceful way and putting the power in the hands of the youth to really dictate where this is going to go next. So this is definitely one of the, you know, four of the things that we always let people know as well. It's about peace, love, unity, and having fun. And if you're not having fun, like, why are you going to keep doing this? Right? Like whether it's dance, whether it's knowledge, whether it's music or art, if you are not enjoying it, like why would you want to continue? Because you're only going backwards. You're not serving like the hip hop community. And also you are just making yourself less and less excited about things that could be used in a better way. So, you know, I always say, start with you. You got to enjoy the process. You got to have fun doing it. You got to love this. And then unity is literally what we're doing today. It's just a way that we come together because of the love that we have for this culture of this movement. And then we're doing this in a peaceful way. And all these protests that we are watching too, if they're done in a peaceful way, like that is like their way of expressing and, you know, presenting the values of hip hop. But of course, it can't always be done in a peaceful way either. Like, as we know, like history does tend to repeat itself. And, you know, with the radical kind of like movement, you need that kind of like resistance to face the reality of the bullshit in the politics and the discrimination and the oppression that have been passed on systemically, right? So this is not something that is just kind of like surfaced up this year to pay attention to and be like, oh, this is cool. No, like it has never been about the cool thing. It was purely an act of resistance to communicate how they felt when they were dealt this card, this hand of oppression, social injustice, police brutality, war on drugs, especially in the Bronx area. So that's where, you know, this knowledge piece becomes very, very important, right? Because if you don't know, you're not gonna really like know where you're headed. So at least as a starting point, you know, we can look to this as a fundamental first step to take. And actually, speaking of this, I wanted to put on this quote. I came across this. Can you guys see this screen right now? Sorry, my bad. Pause share, new share. No. Screen. What is happening? Stop share. Hi guys. Sorry, this should have been so much easier, but right here. Maya Angelou, a great quote I came across today. Just spot on, you know? And doing the best just means that like, you know whether you're like giving your best or not. You know, like I'm sure our parents have always kind of told us, you can do better, you can do more. But really, deep down, we're the only ones that know whether we tried our best or not. So until we know for sure, we just gotta try. But then once we know these things, once we have talked about these things that we're going over today, and then we are able to process it, comprehend it, and then think about how we can make it more applicable, then now it's a different type of responsibility that we have to bring about change because we know better. So that's where I wanted to kind of leave off with the knowledge portion. And peace, love, unity, and having fun. This is a track actually, but I think some of you might recognize the influence, the inspiration behind Do the Right Thing. If you have not checked out that movie, I think it's on Netflix. Spike Lee classic. It's a very, very deep movie. Similar to what is happening right now, you'll see in the movie. So next slide, we have a quick interview. I have played it before, so I'm gonna just play it. It's about a minute. Let's just take this in, just so that we can all take a minute in and reflect on this. So hopefully you have your audio set up. I know the video might be a little bit choppy, but if you can hear the audio just fine, just
to reflect the times.
Let me just start over.
An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times. I think that is true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. As far as I'm concerned, it's their choice. But I choose to reflect the times and the situations in which I find myself. That to me is my duty. And at this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That to me is the definition of an artist. Can you be an artist and not reflect the times?
Cool.
That to me is the definition of.
Was everyone able to see that and hear that at least? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Nina Simone, she was very, very involved as well with the activism. There are a few Netflix documentaries and videos as well that you can like look up. So as I keep mentioning over and over, this is not, and this should not be the only time we take in these cultural like bits. You can't learn a language just like online and expect you to be cultured. You might know how to express and communicate using that language, but you got to go to that place where culture and the lifestyle is really like vivid and very, very prevalent for you to feel what it's like to be in that cultural environment. And that's the same thing with hip hop. And that can take place at a dance studio. It could take place like out on the streets when you notice someone like breaking. You could watch a rap concert, but really a lot of it too is just you kind of understanding, where do you fit in? Like, how do I process this information that makes sense to me? Because hip hop is subjective. Like art, it's a very subjective area where you cannot say what it means to me for hip hop is the same thing as my sister Liz, or the way Cody defines hip hop is not going to be the same as how Alan describes hip hop, right? So I wanted to kind of like take a little couple minutes to just digest this information. I apologize if I'm just kind of like going back and forth. I apologize if this is like your first time. I mean, like you've heard this many times, but it never hurts to just kind of reassure like what you are learning about. So I hope that everyone is taking in the information and it's being placed in a healthy place in your minds. So let's just have a quick like dialogue discussion between everyone to just like speak on what the last few minutes was like, but also you can talk about your first encounter with hip hop. what aspects of hip hop you think are more important than others, or this is where I think hip hop is very powerful as a form of communication. So open to everyone. Let's get a little gallery view going. Boom. What does hip hop mean to you? Liz, hold on one second. I'm gonna unmute you. So we're gonna get Liz to go first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. To me, hip hop is a very soul-freeing experience. So when I'm at a karaoke, I like to sing rap songs, and it frees my soul. It's very I love the tempo. You know how I can just pick up the speed and just just kind of express myself through words and rhythm. So and it helps me to live in the current time. Like it encourages me to like really live in the moment and really take in all the vibes and all the energy. So I like it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, like, especially something that Liz said, hip hop does have a much faster pace, than other genres. That kind of speaks to also like how, especially like Black artists didn't feel they had a platform to say meaningful shit. So when they found out that this platform of rap was going to be their thing, and it's not that it was 1979, like first time rap became a thing. No, like it's all deeply rooted to their cultural practice, gospel music, storytelling in a circle. All these things are passed on, right? So when they had found out about the power and the potential behind rap, maybe that was their way of just putting in all these incredibly important messages within short amount of time with explicit languages and the words that maybe were so like shunned by other people, because that was their reaction to their reality. We've been oppressed, we've been stripped away of all these rights, human rights, basic human rights. One thing we can do is freely express with no boundaries. So on that note, I do have, a couple of my opinions too about the censorship, because it's not just a clean version, radio edit or explicit. It's not that black and white. It's not that easy, right? That's where you have to understand, like, why do that? Now, if a rap record just has nonsense of just swear words one after what, then like I don't even like care to listen to that. But if the message is there and if the person really felt the need to emphasize it with 17 F words, maybe let's think about the context. Let's think about their situation and the circumstances, right? Because rap was not the first medium under entertainment that started to portray these types of things. Quentin Tarantino, the movie Superbad, Jonah Hill dropping F-bombs and the most amount of F-bombs than ever. So all these things are, in gray areas, but it does help when we actually get to having conversations about this, right? So cool. Anyone else want to share? Please feel free to weigh in anywhere. Alan? Yes.
So for hip hop, well, hip hop to me is like an extension of my body, my mind, and the soul, because it allows me to express my feelings and an emotion. Because sometimes, in life, we're so afraid of saying what we really want to say, and we just can't. Mm-hmm. So using hip hop as a platform to express that, gives us a lot of confidence, right? And that's why you see like many dancers and artists from way back then. That's what they did, and that's what they try, and it's been helping, because for generations now, that's what people have been doing for many like generations. So Hip hop, again, like you said, it's subjective. It's different for everyone, but it has so many layers that a lot of people haven't tapped in yet. But once they do, it's just like a freedom of expression. So yeah, again, hip hop for me is on a physical level. It's just like there's a lot of meaningful things that comes from it.
Cool. Freedom of expression, 100%. And yeah, like you said, you know, this is just artists have been doing this for generations, and there are reasons that people resonate with certain messages, with certain artists, with certain artistry. So I think it is honestly like one of the best things that's coming out of this like time right now is this like new sense of coming together, and collectively we are becoming much more conscious and like aware of like ourselves and one another, and how that actually like impacts, you know, our social circles and all of this. So it's great. Thank you for sharing. Michael, thank you for joining from Ottawa. Community and support, that is huge. You know, if you cannot support one another in building the communities, then like it's just it's exactly the opposite of like what hip hop has, you know, stood for. And I always like saying this too. It's not just for people that identify as hip hop heads. Like, you know, I'll be very honest, like being part of and having witnessed like Mel and Breath and Movement's like production over the years through Fringe and everything else has been a huge chapter of like my personal inspiration. In some ways, much bigger than my own crew, because it's just unique. It's just very different than my own personal experience. So you have to remove yourself sometimes from the equation to just feel like I'm coming into this conversation with an empty cup, you know? And that's what it also had allowed me to learn more about this. Because hip hop, every year I learn something, but I gotta let go as well. And I've been seeing this a lot, the learning, the process of unlearning and then relearning. So hip hop is the one thing that has always been constant for me to remind me that like you are not done learning. You know, whatever you think you just did was good, you can do more, you can do better. Not ever like discrediting what, you know, we had done together, but just to kind of like keep my ego checked, and, you know, keep reminding me of the humility. Like, don't do it for you. Do what you love to do, like in terms of like expression for you. But when it's about giving back and getting others involved, like do that with the intention of building others and supporting one another, right? Thank you for sharing, Michael. Anyone else have anything they wanted to add on to what hip hop means to them? If you don't want to share right now, that's okay. All I ask is that you just think about it.
I do.
Oh, here's Cody. What's
I was
up,
waving, but I
sorry, I'm in a yeah.
So something that I've learned, like started to connect together and understand a little bit more, is that hip hop culture is very deeply rooted in like LGBTQ plus rights as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, just realizing how you were talking about the timelines and like the different components that have led to developing hip hop, and how those communities were really instrumental in, you know, the whole movement of equalizing gay rights, which is still a huge battle that we're fighting right now. So it definitely like makes me have a much deeper, I mean, I've always appreciated, but the appreciation is even deeper now and makes me want to learn a lot more about, you know, I have a connection to hip hop culture in the dance sense, but I also have the connection from that sense as well. So I think it's even more important to, you know, dig deeper and have a better understanding and see how, like you just said, how my personal experiences fit within that, and, you know, can lead me on my own life path, I guess, in the future.
For sure, because it's about everyone's individual footprints, right? Like everyone here needs to learn how to follow as well, you know, but at the end of the day, like ultimately we have to lead our own journey. But like, especially around what's happening right now, around like these, you know, we have to like, we have to do things and, you know, support and really show our support. Yes, but like, it's just as powerful to show your support for someone else who is already actively leading, right? So that also means that you are learning more about yourself, your capacity to lead, but also to follow. Let yourself go and just follow the movement, because that sometimes is what's going to be leading towards more productivity and being effective, you know, in terms of making change. So Alicia, is a way that you can see and hear yourself within a greater society that doesn't always see or hear me. That is a wonderful way to articulate it. And it's so powerful because, yeah, not everyone has the same voice. Not everyone speaks the same language. But things that come under the umbrella of hip hop are universal. The peace, the love, art, music, dance, it's all connected through the soul piece, you know? And that's why it's so important to just continue talking about this. Like, not setting any issues aside, but if we can start to affiliate ourselves with the core foundation of what hip hop really stands for, then you become part of this cause from a more personal standpoint. Just as Cody mentioned too, I've always broken it down. This more recently, I've broken it down where like hip hop or anything foundational you learn, there is a technical side of it where you learn the mechanics of this dance move. And then you have to understand where you come from. If you have gymnastics background, that is a huge part of your foundation. If you've been singing all your life, that is your foundation. You cannot ignore that and just say, I'm going to learn the foundation to dance. Like, you have to integrate the two together. So that's where this becomes a lot more about your own journey and self-learning, and how you can really see that you matter much more than you think, and you are all part of hip hop much more than you think as well. So if anyone else has anything to say, Liz, please, yes, go ahead.
So I think hip hop is a movement, and it stops us from stalling at one point, but it keeps the movement going, and it evolves, and it gets better every time. And I also think that like hip hop really unites us all. So it brings us closer, and it can just really help us become one. So
yeah, it uplifts others. It empowers the next, person next to you. And yeah, like you said, it's forever changing. It's always evolving. And because it's so like multifaceted too, it's not just a dance style, it's not just a musical genre, it's got everything. Like, that's why the kind of evolution that we experience sometimes can just feel like, what is that? How is that hip hop? Because if you haven't been associating with this one particular branch of hip hop, you might just really be lost as that starts to grow even more, right? And what's Marie saying? Hip hop symbolizes hope for many people, and that's why it speaks to everybody. Exactly. But important to know that it came from the unheard voices that experience oppression and disparity. Yes. Yeah. And again and again, as we give and provide this platform and this, medium we call hip hop to especially the younger generation, the young people that are literally like on the front line of some of these protests, to be part of this like huge movement. And if they can understand the potential that they have, and also through hip hop, I think that's where this like evolution is headed in a very healthy and powerful direction. And to quote Dave Chappelle, I watched his recent special, kids are wonderful drivers, and I'm very comfortable sitting in the back seat. And that really hit me because like, I'm guilty of that sometimes too, where like, I'm just gonna like keep on doing my thing because I don't trust the youth. Like I feel like I got this, you know? But sometimes you gotta like let go, you just gotta let it be as well. So this slide in particular summarizes the circumstances that brought together the movement of hip hop. You know, throughout the course of its evolution, it's always been tied to the social injustice faced, especially by the Black population in the States. But it is a global issue, of course. And then, you know, if we're gonna get a little bit more specific with like breaking in early days of hip hop, there is this like argument that like it came from both African and Latino community as well, and it is a fact. But a lot of the deeper cultural roots really came from the African communities, you know, and that's where all of this education that we're taking on is more relevant, and it's just like much more like personal in terms of like, oh, because like we felt like we've gained and learned a lot from hip hop throughout the years, whether you took a class or not. You know, we have benefited. So that's just got that connection to how we have always viewed hip hop, but now how we should kind of shift that idea of what we think that is. So this kind of leads us to kind of speak about some of the iconic figures that made hip hop and the music what it is today. Where is the chat? I can't see it. Anyways, so going back to the 60s, the era of soul and funk music, James Brown, one of like the most influential artists, period. James Brown's track called Funky Drummer is known to be one of the most sampled musical piece like in history of music. There's another song called Amen Break. That one's just as popular too. But James Brown, Funky Drummer, if you heard any of like Run DMC popular tracks, Mama's Gonna Knock You Out, Mama Said Knock You Out by LL Cool J, Cool G Rap and Polo. Anyway, I can go on. It's the most sampled piece of music in the history of music. And his song, Say It Loud, Black and Proud. If you haven't checked out, there is a movie called Get On Up on Netflix that stars Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther. He plays James Brown, and it's an incredible film too. You really get to hear and see what the circumstances were like back then, and especially seeing it from the artist James Brown's perspective too. And then Jill Scott Heron, I'm sure especially this one, the revolution will not be televised. It will not be printed on the Xerox machines. You know, this is another very, very influential piece of music. And that's in 1974, right? 30, 40 years ago, but speaking about the same shit that we're talking about today, you know? And Public Enemy and NWA are probably two of the most notoriously well known for their like political stance when it came to fighting the social injustice and really just like not giving any kind of F to just like go out there and do their thing. And if anyone was gonna stop them, they tried, but that didn't actually stop them. You know, so that speaks volumes in terms of like the confidence that they possess, but also the kinds of oppression that they were dealing with to just say enough is enough. And we don't know any other way, any better way to say these things, to spark change. So, of course, before Public Enemy and NWA, there have been a few artists and rap groups as well, like Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Their song "The Message" is known as one of the first rap songs that was like a conscious rap, like rap record with a message. And that one is very powerful as well, so I encourage you to check that out. And next slide, we got some more of the current music. This is the latest album by Run the Jewels. Jamie, his name's LP, the producer, rapper, and Killer Mike Killer Mike, you might have seen in a recent interview that he gave addressing what was happening in the state of Georgia, I believe. So he's an activist as well, but a very powerful MC. Run the Jewels just dropped this album a week ago for free. They early released it, and you can read this excerpt here from their album, just saying there's a lot of shit going on right now, and we want this to be available. Hopefully this helps you kind of deal with the situation. So I believe it is still available for free download. You can stream it for free. Of course, you can donate and purchase, but they have made it available for free. So you always have to give that respect and appreciation for the artists that are just doing things for the sake of the love and positive movement. Counterculture aspect is why there's such a blowback on the commercialization of hip hop. That's for another culture chat. Very true. This is why I need Marie. She's just like, and the commercialization, yeah, like we can get into more of that, especially that would be more relevant to how we kind of view hip hop culture from a dance community perspective. And I do have the next couple slides that focus a little bit more on the dance side of things, but yeah, for sure, because when it was so sacred and it was so personal, and you know, the Black artist left it out there for the open, for the public to receive and feel, as they kind of gave it as a gift. We then found ways to monetize it. We then found ways to twist the words. We then found ways to like just bastardize like what they were trying to do, and literally just like paint this other picture of, look at them glorifying violence towards women and the drug use and all these things. And if you really look into the history of that too, it was an industry. It was a money making, like, individuals and corporations that found the opportunity to penetrate that system and make it into a billion-dollar industry. And when they juice all the profit out of the b-boys, the b-girls, and the rappers, it just became something entirely different, you know? Exploitation. The whole scene of breaking got exploited, so no one wanted to be seen as like active members of hip hop anymore because they thought it was corny, because you didn't want to be a sellout. But during those times, of course, people that are really, really into like the true values of culture took the time to say some meaningful shit, you know, still made their moves. So there's a lot of things that we can discuss about the side of conscious rap and, you know, the positive side of hip hop. And here we have De La Soul, we have Rocksteady Crew, a bunch of b-boys and b-girls, probably from the early 80s, I would say. Dynamic Rockers, like these crews, Rocksteady Crew and Dynamic Rockers, still exist. They're still active and they're still out there representing and building this hip hop community. And that is another very interesting thing about this culture. The pioneers and literally the founding members of this culture are still around. They are still around. They have not changed course. They've maintained their status of a true head, you know, and they're just doing what they've known since they were kids. And for me, I simply learn by just messaging them, because we have the tools like Instagram to just DM them. So I'm actually in the process of, hopefully in the next few weeks, bringing on, his name's Why Not. He is a vice president of Rocksteady Crew. So one of the first like b-boy, b-girl crew that came around in the 70s. So he is currently in the position as a vice president of the crew. And, you know, I've chatted with him many times, but like, I'm really trying to get his insight on like, where should we begin in terms of like cultural education, especially now that we seem to be a little bit more understanding about the relevance and the importance of cultural education. Where do we begin? And how do we translate this message so that it sticks, so that it actually stays with us for a long time, not just another, cool, got it, let me update my bio, culturally woke. Like, that's never enough. That's never enough, right? So This is Rakim and Eric B on the left side over here, and right here you see Jazzy Jam Master J, sorry, of Run DMC, and Rev Run, and Daryl McDaniels, the MC of Run DMC. So this is another short documentary. I'm going to just kind of skip this one, and I'll share this link so you all can watch on your own. This is literally like 6 minutes, not too long at all, but it is a very short and concise documentary of like how hip hop began in the Bronx and how that's seen as an art form, but of course it had its like ups and downs as well, because people were looking for monetization opportunities and not everyone kind of saw it for truly what it was. And it's still the same today. Not everyone that we talk to about hip hop and the importance of hip hop will truly understand and comprehend the true value of what hip hop does to people, because it's so easy for us to kind of see it as a surface value, and like it's consumable. You download a hip hop track, you listen to it, you want to dance to it, and you teach to it. That's already many layers that we kind of go through, and that's convenient, right? But things that give you that feeling of real joy and value usually takes a long time, and it is tough work. And you don't do it because it's easy. You do it because you truly believe that you putting in this work is going to just help you become a more aware, better person. Not to flex and front on other people, but just because you feel like that's what you deserve. That's what you feel that the people that have put together this culture deserve it. And right, like from the very beginning, hip hop has always been about the community. So like, who am I to say this is my lecture? Who am I to say this is my culture I'm letting you all in on? It's not. Like, I can talk about a Korean culture, but if a white person went to Korea and spent 4 years in Korea in the last 4 years and told me everything about what they experienced, I'm gonna sit down and listen. I'm not gonna be like, there's no way that's true. How can you know? You're not Korean, right? So it's all subjective, and I'm here to share with you all my experience, my encounter through hip hop from my lens, my personal lens, not as the only hip hop head here. So this is just kind of like, you know, where you can see what exists in terms of hip hop in the London scene. Someone come back, she had a music video that was shot at the back of ONE actually last summer. So you know, myself, I think Joseph and Rob were able to participate in it. And Trish won the hip hop award last year for Forest City London Music Award. And her partner DJ Hollywood from Break North Radio, they're always doing some incredible work like for the hip hop community, especially from an MC DJ perspective. And they have their ways of incorporating other elements and other artists as well. And the bottom left corner, Street Series, that's the collaborative project between later, Alan, good to see you. Thanks for joining. We'll chat soon. Street Series, we actually went to their release party, and all these records are individually drawn pieces by this guy, James Kirkpatrick. He's one of the MCs on this. Well, he's actually the only MC of this group. And if some of you noticed, this is actually kind of like a tribute to Midnight Marauders Tribe Called Quest album cover with all these iconic hip hop figures. And something that I found out recently as well is that Crazy Legs from Rocksteady Crew is on this record, as well as Mr. Wiggles. If you didn't know Mr. Wiggles, you need to look up Mr. Wiggles from Electric Boogaloos. And just so that you guys kind of like understand where I'm coming from as well, like Mr. Wiggles was like one of the first street dancers, hip hop artists, hip hop dancers that I looked up, like when internet was a thing to like download videos for the very first time. And he's been around since like early days of hip hop. And for me to see him teach this kind of stuff in a very similar way is what kind of gives me a little bit of like validation to say like, you know what, okay, I'm actually at least on the right path. I definitely don't have the wealth and the depth of experience that he does, but I'm constantly trying to be inspired and be influenced by like these figures too, like, you know, as they experience hip hop today, so that what I'm learning is very relevant, but also has its like origins and roots tied to it as well. And Free for All, this graffiti jam was something that was put together by James Kirkpatrick and his friends to promote like free for all. Any graffiti writer can come to this wall and just paint, and you can paint over one another without feeling like, you know, you're being disrespectful. And I think they've been doing this for about 3-4 years. So it's another cool chapter in London where you get to see lots of cool graffiti. Shat, of course, a very, very, very popular MC out of London. He is the one that has been narrating the Netflix series Hip Hop Evolution. We went to see him at the Gricklegrass Festival this past year. And AZ, Albino Zebras, legendary hip hop crew in London. I say hip hop crew, not a b-boy crew, because in my eyes, they are the definition of a crew that represents hip hop. They're not just break dancers, they DJ, they MC, they write, and they're just all around like practitioners of hip hop. And that's what I aspire to be. And that's like, you know, as Illa Will crew members, we want to make sure that we are dabbling into all these areas. And if I'm not the one that's going to be good at it, at least let's show our kids, our next generation, the ways for them to get the tangible experience and be better than how we are right now, right? Brown skin lady Zara, she is on CHRW, the Radio Western, as one of the hosts. She hosts Lunar Rotation series, so she may be one of our guests in the coming weeks for midnight. You may have caught her at the Fem Jam this past March. And of course, you would have caught Trish Someone as well, and DJ Hollywood. So these are some things that are happening within the London scene. And of course, like all the classes that are being offered through ONE, Sound of Motion, North London Dance, and all the other studios, hip hop very much exists. But in terms of the cultural knowledge, it's not something that is being offered on a regular basis. So this opportunity for us to come together, I just thought, you know what, we got to keep this up. We got to continue this conversation, because culture is not made up of 4 people, right? And it's about food. It's about the time we spent together. It's about the conversations. It's about the clothing. It's about the musical choices. So all these things need to be brought up for us to discuss a little bit further and truly understand one another as well, for us to feel like, okay, now we can understand our own set of cultural values, whether we label it as hip hop or not. We can come together to practice what it means to feel cultured. And especially in a place like Canada, it's not the easiest thing, you know, because we're constantly like being compared to the States. So we think we're good, but we're not that much different. And, you know, as an immigrant too, like I've been very fortunate and grateful, but a lot of things that I've struggled with as well kind of come from the same thing. So this, I think the last or second last slide right here is more specific to the hip hop as a dance style. On the left, we have Henry Link and Buddha Stretch of Mop Top Foundation and Elite Force crew. They are, I would say, 2 of the pioneers that helped shape hip hop dance as a party dance, as a social dance. And I have not personally taken a workshop from them, but I've reached out to them, and then, you know, I follow their journey, and just any videos that I look up, like it usually starts there. I don't go looking for like the best of like Ian Eastwood choreography, simply because for me, I just don't relate as much like to those. But when I watch the foundational breakdowns, I just take away so much more that can be pumped out in my own ways. So Buddha Stretch and Henry Link actually have done a lot of these like old school, middle school, new school dictionary that you can look up on YouTube. They're just dancing around on a basketball court. And literally that's where I get all these grooves that I teach based on what I see there. And of course, other videos that will go at a very much deeper depth to go into how that came to be. And other dancers have articulated this too. When it comes to foundation, the fundamentals of hip hop dance, it's not a lot about the steps, like the moonwalk or the arm wave. They're not really the fundamentals. It's more about the basic bounce that comes out through the music that you hear. Music is where we should start, right? And without the music, you can't really understand the foundation to the dance, and like this is kind of like what I had talked about in the chat with the ONE choreographers too. If we choose to just dance to instrumentals, and if we just dance to the drums, it's so much more pure because we don't necessarily have to rely on the lyrical content or like the real message behind it, simply the feels of the percussions and how that's layered on top of other instrumentation. So a bounce and the rock and the groove are what I call the ABCs of hip hop foundation. And they're the capital letters, A, the B, the C. A, the bounce. And when you add the rock to it, that's you bouncing left to right or bouncing front to back. And that becomes a movement. A move plus a move becomes a movement. And then when you put those movements in a series and you build a pattern, that's what you call a groove. And grooves usually exist in pockets. In a song, you're not going to start dancing from the first second of the record until the very last second. You find the time you feel like, oh, this is a dancing part. And that was the DJ's role, to find those portions and link them together. So when you look at the bounce, rock, and groove, those are the ABCs. And the way I like to go into the ABCs, the lowercase, is the hits, the pauses, and isolation. Okay, so the pause means you're literally like doing a move and then you're just stopping. It's not much of a like high impact move, but you're just giving yourself a tiny break. So a bounce with a pause would be a bounce, pause, bounce, pause, bounce, pause, bounce, pause. And then when you add a rock to a hit, it will be like a rock, hit. You rock, then you hit. Or the rock itself could have that hitting effect by just adding a little bit of a to that same move. And those pieces become the lower cases of A, B, C. And the C, the isolation, is how you manipulate the one move to the next. How do we separate the A to B? Is those additional like textures that we can add in, the details. And then the skate, the wave, just mean how do you move from the one groove to another? Okay, like you need those punctuations, you need those like ways to kind of like smoothen out your transitions. That's where the skating comes in. That's where the wave just means you're waving your body through a movement, not just doing arm waves and body waves. So these are just the fundamentals that I've learned that are very practical in my freestyle, in my own training. When I choreograph, I start there. When I listen to music, I move, and then I see where it goes. Usually I don't have like a destination in mind. It's just a journey. I just like let the music kind of lead me. And then if I felt good about a certain portion, I think about what was I doing and what was the sound that I was reacting to and what was a pattern that I kind of went off of. So that's like more to do with the social dance, the party dance style of like, this is how we do it, right? And then the breaking part, which is the original form of hip hop dance, has its own fundamentals too. The top rock or rocking, you're up top on your feet and you're making space. You're letting people know that something's gonna happen and you need to make sure that people understand through your body language that this is where you're going to make a statement. And how graffiti culture came into like place for B-boys and B-girls is me simply doing this. My hand gestures of 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2 meant that read my shirt. This is who I represent. This is my crew. This is my name. And graffiti writers that used to tag their shirts started to break and they wanted others to know that they are writers first. and then they got into breaking. So they rely on these things with the belt buckles, their hats, to let them know who they are. Again, making a statement about who they are is very, very important, right? So that's where the top rock extra flavors kind of come into play. And when we go a little bit deeper into the cultural practices, something that I learned from Q Rock, our native artist, dancer, cultural educator, he taught us rocking, and he's also a grass dancer. So he does his powwow dance, and like when you see him do things like this, it's not just him brushing his hair back, you know, it's the act of smudging, and it's a cultural practice that they really have been doing all their life, whether they identify themselves as a dancer or not, hip hop head or not. Is deeply rooted into their own culture. So that's where these things come out very naturally, right? So we're always borrowing. This is never a purely original thing. It's always borrowing, right? As long as we pay our respect to the originators and we make those references, then we're in the clear, right? And then the go down is where we transition from up top to the ground. Okay, unique ways for us to move our dance from up top down to the floor. And when we get to the footwork part, that's when we can have a little bit more of a unique aspect in terms of street dance, because no other dance spends that much time on the ground, right? So that's where breaking is known to be very, very original. And that's where I say, this is your canvas. You can paint stuff, you can write things out, you can spell it out, and there are no limits. So of course, we're not gonna like go into like breaking workshop today. Just wanted to outline those things for you guys to kind of understand that even in a culture that you may not be so familiar with, for example, breaking, it does have its like kind of like formula, if you will. And it's good to start there, because then more of us are kind of in the same on the same page about how we do things. What we do is it can easily be like, what we do is hip hop, but how we choose to express hip hop should be all different. But if we have these kind of bases in terms of the bounce, the rock, the groove, and the top rock footwork freezes, then we can at least be somewhat relevant and relatable in terms of like passing the energy around. And it's always about the exchange, and that's what ciphers are about. It's a conversation. It's not just me. It should be more of an exchange back and forth, and that's what I would love to see more and more, especially within dance classes. Is let's just take these 5 elements of bounce, rock, just 3: bounce, rock, and groove. Let's spend 20 minutes just bouncing, rocking, and grooving, and cipher for 20 minutes. And how would we feel after? Right? Because that's where we get to actually share the time and experience to create our own narrative and our own language, as opposed to you learning a pre-written piece that you just get to watch, learn, and just duplicate. So that's where I think the core fundamentals are super important, because without that, there's not much sense of originality. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, cool. Well, we really just have the last slide right here, and this is just about where do we go from here? You know, I really appreciate everyone sharing their input, asking questions. If you have any questions right now, we are at 5:38, so almost at 6 o'clock, but I would love to just have a chat about everything that was just said. And the next steps from here, at least coming from my end and our end of 519 School of Hip Hop, is we're going to continue this weekly, bi-weekly, but every day I'm trying to learn more and more about hip hop. So we're going to continue hosting these talks to learn more about hip hop in Canada, not just like rap, not just music, but hip hop scene in Canada, in London, going deeper into the history. Vinyl examination is something that I've been doing with some of the crew members and other students, where we take a look at physical copies of the rap record and hip hop music and funk and other stuff too. And we get a little bit further into the socio-economical, like, you know, context during that time. If this record came out in 1994, what happened in the 1991 and 1993 that sparked this artist to say these things? And where did these samples come from? Because she sampled, I think, 3 of tracks from Wu-Tang. And me finding that out physically, just dropping the needle and finding it, that was so much more meaningful than just Shazamming it, right? So I want to kind of facilitate these conversations for us all to have a better sense of the culture behind the music. And then, of course, the physical training when it comes to hip hop. Let's just continue learning this foundation and get into the practice of building this groove so that you can have your own bounce, you can have your own rock, you can have your own groove based on this formula that was already created by the pioneers of this culture. Cool. Yes, Liz?
Yeah, I didn't know that smudging could be introduced into the hip hop. Like, so, like, it's awesome that like you can cleanse your own aura as you cleanse other people's aura, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really meaningful, and yeah, it's like a type of dance that I look forward to learning someday. You know, the whacking.
Mm.
Yeah, so I really find that like the house dancing really cool and like very interesting to learn. So yeah, I see that like how smudging can be compared to like whacking or maybe just like a house techno.
I mean, I don't want to give you an answer on this because I don't know. But, you know, I would say though, like smudging and like how that's relevant to the top rock and the rocking art form and the powwow dance is not necessarily in the same lane as like the Vogue, the house dance, and the whacking.
True, yeah.
Culturally, they have their own, you know, historical kind of events that led to these movements. But right now, you'll see everything overlap. You see everything overlap. And that's where it's just like so easy for us to just kind of see that as like, oh, it's similar. But many times, like it might come from a same place, but at the very same time, how that one art form kind of like came to this place is very far from a whole different like movement. Maybe they took very similar steps because of the similar types of oppression and similar types of resistance that they felt in their own subjective ways. So yeah, it's cool because like even like martial arts too, you know, like there's a lot of crossovers, but each art form has its own roots and origins, right? Anyone else? Let's see. I'm gonna just stop share now, and I will also send. Would it be helpful if you had a copy of this PDF file? Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Cool. Let's see who is still here. We have Kelly, Liz, Murray, Melissa, Michael, and Cody, Alicia, and Jordan. Cool. Well, we can stick around for a few minutes to chat a little bit more, very informal. But I wanted to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for making time on this Sunday to be part of this important conversation. I don't know if you can tell, for me, this is a very, very passionate, you know, I'm very passionate about hip hop. And as I mentioned many times, I'm forever a student, you know, so more folks I have next to me, more exciting it is for me. And this is what I've always wanted, you know, in terms of like within the London community, especially around the dance scene, because it's just helped me in so many ways. I simply believe that this can be translated universally to anybody. This is for everybody, but I have to also be honest when I say this is not on everyone's priority item, right? And like no one really shares the same viewpoint when it comes to interpreting hip hop as well. So I really don't want to be that person to like force anything. But as Marie and I hopefully had made it fairly clear to all of you, we are here as a resource. We are here to continue making these workshops and conversations as accessible as possible. And they don't always have to be these types of like Zoom sessions. You know, we can just literally just have a one-on-one chat, and I'm okay to just kind of like go deeper into one aspect. But our dream and the goal for the next couple of months is for us to, thank you, Michael, in the next month or two, is to be able to utilize our new space at 509 School of Hip Hop to host more workshops about the culture, and exclusive to, like, you know what, this is all about emceeing, this is all about poetry, this is all about movement, this is all about, you know, the DJing. And you need that to make sense of this knowledge that we are stacking in our brains too, right? It's like taking a cooking class and getting all the information you need and not cooking up your own dish. Like, why would you take that class? Right. So I hope everyone found this valuable. Anybody else want to just chime in on anything? This is open for everyone. Yes, Cody, let's unmute everybody.
Yeah, so kind of like going off of what you were just saying and what Liz brought up too, there are, you know, there are so many different like avenues to go down in terms of like educating on different components that fall within the hip hop culture. Now, some of those from like an internet learning, documentaries, whatnot perspective is accessible. But let's say if we want to learn hip hop dance culture, like if we're using whacking or voguing or those kinds of things as an example, is not as easily accessible in the physical form in the London community. So I just want to know like what your thoughts are for that, like in that aspect, on how to best approach that.
I think one response I have to that is kind of like facilitating these types of conversations with the smaller groups of individuals that are more interested in like just digging further and deeper into that, and then connecting with someone that's close to us from Toronto or Detroit, Chicago, to just like facilitate these like, you know, online conversations, and then together sharing the resources about documentaries and, you know, short video clips to go into. And then as long as like that smaller group of people are doing their due diligence in knowing the history, and you don't take it out of context to just like learn it as a style to teach a set of choreography to, then I think that's really all we can do at this point. Because until we start opening the doors from the studios and all that, it's just very, very difficult to facilitate that physical, visceral experience with others. So until then, I think it's just, you know, let's get the intellectual side built up, and let's just have an open mind about like this culture that we're diving into, and also know that this is going to be a more than a 3-week learning thing, right? And similar to how we've tried to make this conversation, always relate it back to you. Like, why do I feel so attached to this? Why do I feel so connected to house music? You know, and then it just becomes more about the inward reflection too. And then the technical side of like voguing and whacking will come through actual repetition of the movement. And yeah, especially with breaking, like breaking is not something I can just like teach someone over screaming like, you see that right leg, put it at that angle and kick it down there while you lift up the other leg, and the other hand, place it here. It's just not that easy. But like, I'm just trying to plant as many seeds as possible to the students' minds, and then once I see them in person, it's just like all the lighting, all the water, all the nutrients, and be like, let's do this. So they're equipped, they're well equipped to actually go full out. I hope that.
Can I add to that for a second?
Yes.
Okay. So I think what Cody's asking too, just to the fact that we may not have those resources in the city. I think, for example, because we're going to talk about like whacking and voguing, before social media and like the accessibility of looking people up and seeing people's dances online and things like on TikTok or whatever. But I think looking up like your pioneer dancers of voguers, whackers, and then their history, then you would get that sort of resource that you might not get in London, because we don't have that type of population or that community of voguers. Mm-hmm. But for example, like in Toronto, there's a huge obviously there's a huge population of more of like the voguers and the whackers, but we featured someone named Twisted on our Artist Wellness. I'm going to be sharing his video in the next week or so on my IGTV, but he's a good resource. Yeah. And he's he's from a voguing house in New York, and started sort of an outreach kind of program called Kiki Ballroom in Toronto. So someone like that, if you look through even his account or like look him up, you could kind of see sort of his history, and from his history he can teach you a lot about how voguing happened and what, from his perspective, what voguing meant to him. So even looking up, I think, pioneers of that dance helps, instead of, like, I know it's hard when you're just Googling like voguing and whacking to like get that authentic like experience, because we don't experience that here. So I totally get where you're coming from. But I think from that angle, if you find people that maybe are in Canada or are reachable through Instagram, or you can even like just study sort of their sort of history or their evolution in their career, it kind of helps give you a little bit of that. Because yes, I totally get we don't have that, and obviously going up to Toronto does help, but we don't always have that luxury to just be in that environment and be immersed in that environment. So exactly. I think in that way you can kind of get a little bit more of education through that. But yeah, like the inward reflection does help on top of kind of seeing someone else's journey and where they're coming from and how their sort of identity has evolved with that, especially with voguing and whacking, right? Because there's so many layers, like layers of the queer community and layers of like it branching off from hip hop and what does that mean, and the culture of voguing and whacking, and those two, how are they similar and how are they different? Yeah. Like there's so much things to even like touch that, yes, like we can't obviously provide that, but even talking to someone like Twisted, or talking to a house dancer, a popper that can come down and talk about those different things and hold workshops. But again, it's more like, who is going to come to these workshops if we don't know our foundations, and we don't know, like, why would we even come to that workshop, right? That sort of thing. So, but yeah, I think I just wanted to add to that, because it's hard for sure. But that is one thing to kind of do.
For sure.
Thank you, for sure, Marie. Yes, Liz?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting to learn like the knowledge side of it. So like, it's eye-opening, when you learn the language, when you learn the knowledge, it like opens up the horizon, and it's like, it's really, it makes it a new experience. So I think.
Yeah. Sorry.
Is that your dad?
No, I think a couple of you might have clicked on the link that I sent. But
oh.
Yeah, it's true. The knowledge portion is what, again, it builds the confidence, right? And like the awareness of yourself and the culture, then you just feel much more equipped to actually say things and like express yourself to the fullest with total honesty, because you're not faking the funk. But there are so many of us who just like lack the knowledge, but you build that confidence. Not saying that confidence is like overconfidence is always wrong, but like if you just don't have the knowledge history to back that up, then it's just at a very shallow level. You're expressing yourself, and one of these days you're going to get called out and you're not going to be able to back it up. But knowing all these things, also not to simply just front on people, is what's really important, right? Like let's just kind of like take a moment to also address, you know, the whole performative like activism is like not serving anybody any good, because like, why are you doing this in the first place? Like, stop putting yourself in the center of everything. Just as hip hop, we're all guests, we're all visitors, we're all welcome here. And that's a beautiful thing. No one has ever said no, like to me when it came to hip hop. So I have to really honor that. And it really has no boundaries when it comes to like what authentic hip hop really truly represents. It sees beyond all these things that are very superficial and surface level of like race, religious views, and political aspects, and like, you know, age, gender, doesn't really matter. So, you know, just accepting that this is for everyone, and you putting in this work is simply to better yourself so that you can like serve others in a more positive way too. So I sent a couple of links. The one to the history of hip hop and the art in the Bronx. That's the one that was in the slide. And then the second one is a quick history of house dancing I had seen a long time ago. So I think especially Cody, you would really enjoy that too. They touch on the voguing and whacking a little bit. It's a very old school documentary. So it's all pixelated and shit, but that's when you know it's good. Cool. Anybody else have anything else they want to share or ask?
What documentary did you watch today, Jed?
I was watching, it was the Bronx to Billionaires. It was about the hip hop music industry. I think it actually just auto played after the 6-minute documentary of history of hip hop in the Bronx. And that's where, you know, some of the founding fathers of hip hop have said a few things about how like we really don't get the respect we deserve for creating this multi-billion dollar industry. Because like, as a consumer, right, like why would you think that far back, you know? But Grandmaster Caz, he speaks about how he was invited on set for the video of one of the Macklemore tracks. I didn't even know about this. So when he got asked to be part of this video, he felt like, you know what, that's sort of things should happen more from the current generation of artists. And I'm not saying no one is doing that, but there are definitely too many rappers that I think are just doing it for just not the most healthy reasons, you know? There's just no strong message there that makes you feel good about things. It's just more of just like, who's got the most X's in their names, and who's the littlest of all the little rappers, who's got the most face tattoos. So anyways, it's coming across 6 o'clock almost. So we're gonna wrap things up in a couple minutes, but once again, I want to thank all of you. This has been great to have our first official Culture 101 session with all of you. But as I've mentioned before, this conversation, you're always welcome, always part of it. So please do reach out. Liz?
I think the reason why I like the whacking is because I like the instrumental side of it. So it, you know, just the beat and the fast beat and more of a just the, you know, just like a dynamic upbeat music. That's like, I like it.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. But on that note of the music, if I could add one more thing for you guys to just like kind of take in after today's chat is listen to the music that came before hip hop era, and also listen to the early like 80s hip hop music, just to feel like, this is what made people dance. This is how they used to rap. This is what they used to talk about. And these are the audience, you know, that really gravitated towards this. And what's really interesting too about that is that during that time, the audience, so like a lot of our parents, let's say, they had a choice to either take that and like internalize and really process it further and deeper, or just dismiss it like, it's a fad, you know? So it's also an interesting perspective to kind of get into when it comes to like the pre-golden hip hop era. But yeah, just music, it should always be like the first thing that I think, especially as movers, as dancers, music is so important. So just take that in, to see how you feel, and any comments and feedback is welcome as well. So let me know privately, share publicly. Any help is always appreciated. So thank you all very, very much. Hope that you all have a wonderful evening, rest of the Sunday, and we'll chat again very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye,
Bye.
Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you.